We are a communication and event agency. We connect people, and our focus is very much on two-way and group communications, telepresence, and group enablement. So we run high-level meetings, trade missions, parliamentary groups, society events, academic and commercial conferences, and larger corporate events and corporate culture enhancement. But we're completely technology agnostic, so we're not going into any situation saying here is a platform or here is a solution, and here are the benefits and this is why you should use it. We're listening to what an organization wants to achieve. People generally call us in where they want to elevate their communications, or they want to find a way to transition a particular event or activity or conference online. Obviously accelerated by what's been happening in the past year, but also a sign of a change in communications approach, being driven by the concept of new normal. I won't go into that because I appreciate I'm limited on time today, but if we have time in the panel discussion later, no doubt we can have a look. So we've all got used to video calls, and we use Zoom a lot. Zoom has a lot of depth. It's got a lot of capability, particularly for meetings. People can pop up and ask questions in the Q&A at the end, and people feel more present and included than in a webinar. Webinars can be quite cold. We can't see you. It's quite an alien experience. I'm much more comfortable talking with people rather than at them. And being present is really important. It massively increases attention, retention, and you feel a lot more engaged. And there have been various psychological studies that says that when you're actively engaged with a process, you're releasing endorphins. You're feeling good. Whereas when you're passively watching something, it can be a little dampening on your psyche and your mood. Zoom lets us do proper hybrid events as well. So we do use Zoom quite a lot for that. We recently did one for the Princess Royal where we had 30 people in a room and 40 people online, and there needed to be communication between these two groups. So we deployed a film crew, put large screens in the room, and fully connected these two groups of people together so that at various points, different people, both in the room and online, were able to talk with their respective parties, and ensure the event that usually would have been in person went off without a hitch. So that's fine when you've got sort of 30 people in a room and 30 or 40 people online. But how do you do that with 100 people? Or 1,000 or 4,000? What are the communication dynamics? Who is going to be able to talk with whom? We hear a lot of people talking about we want to do hybrid events, and the first thing we do is stop and say, well, what's your understanding of what a hybrid event is? Because there's about 15 or 20 different variations on a theme when looking at hybrid. And something that I know Richard wanted me to touch on was the different levels of communication platforms that are out there and the different ways that people can engage. So I understand that you had Hoyen from Remo on the show recently, and Remo is a really good example of one of the next level platforms. So in Zoom, even for large meetings, we've done some with Imperial recently. Rather than using webinar, we've had several hundred online. There's an understood etiquette, but we can have that engagement in the end. And people, when they put Q&A in, can pop up and ask questions. But Remo is a platform where there are a number of tables, and each table is a private video chat. So you can bring several hundred people into the platform. They can be chatting before the main event with each other, with their people on the table, as you would if you went to a conference and had a coffee before things started. And then you can inject various presentations, various materials into the event, and you can encourage discussion and you can encourage people to move around under their own steam. So Remo is a little bit of a step up in terms of orienting audience members and in terms of the computer power, broadband power needed. Not a lot, a little step, but it provides massive increased enhancement in terms of enabling groups to be able to feel present and engage. And it also allows you to mix things up, to change formats and make an event far more engaging. So, for example, with some of the livery stuff we've been doing, you might arrive, you'll be welcomed, then you'll be back at tables, then there might be some speeches, then you'll be back at tables and moving around and talking with your colleagues, and then there might be some toasts and things at the end of the evening. So we can start to recreate some of that interpersonal engagement, some of that social bonhomie, and empower the guest, empower the user to have more control over their involvement in the event. And that makes people more fully engaged, because they know people will be discussing what's been said at tables. Retention levels go through the roof in the same way they do when people actively participate. So I'm sure everybody is familiar with the learning pyramid when if you're in a lecture, you retain about 5% of what's going on. Audio visual gives you about 20% retention. As soon as you get into group discussion, retention levels go north of 50%. So the level of engagement and what people take away and how they feel changes dramatically as you start to use other mediums. So our rule is less talking at and more talking with massively enhances engagement and retention, and people have a more enjoyable time. These second level platforms are also hugely valuable for groups who know each other already. So in terms of corporate engagement, in terms of corporate culture, we do a lot of work with livery companies, clubs and societies who've embraced this next level as they can mingle and socialize, catch up with friends, and break off for private conversations, which brings me on to inclusion. Online events can be more inclusive, not less, than the traditional in-person events. At a recent event, an elderly gentleman sought me out and just said, I just want to say thank you. I can't get to town much anymore. And this has been the first company event that I've been able to attend for years. And it's been an absolute delight to catch up with old friends and see people again. And I was talking with a colleague who was telling me how attendance at their recent AGM by people with disabilities was markedly up due to the fact that it was held online this year. So online events can be more inclusive rather than less. But what about the results? One of the parliamentary groups we work with, and we're actually using Zoom in meeting mode for that, have said they're not going back to the way things were before. So they're getting more parliamentarians attending, they're covering more ground, and they're achieving more than when everybody had to trog up to the committee rooms. So they're planning to have most future meetings online now, with just a few events each year in Parliament to keep that personal connection, possibly even more on a sort of quasi-social basis. So the first level is video conferencing. That's what we've all got used to: Zoom, WebEx, Teams. Not to be underestimated, has huge power under the bonnet if you know how to use it. Can be slightly dangerous if you don't. You don't want to be looking like a cat when you're in meetings. It needs to be used well. The next level is networking and engagement platforms like Remote and AirMeet. A little bit more computer power, a little bit more orientation sometimes, but massive enhanced benefits, particularly when you're dealing with groups of people that you want to be able to enable to communicate with each other as well as to simply digest what you're saying. And by adding that level, you're increasing your own results in terms of retention as well. There are levels above that. So we go into something called XR, extended reality, and then we go up into VR, virtual reality. And there's a whole melting pot, which has been particularly accelerated in the last year, of mingling and mixing between these various levels. So you can be kind of level 2 or level 1 even. You can be adept at video conferencing, but you can go and join a meeting that's happening in VR, if the VR is the platform that particular organisation are using. So video conferencing, engagement platforms, XR. What does XR give you that the engagement platforms don't? Well, you start getting into proximity audio. You start being able to loiter near a group and listen to what's being said and decide whether you want to move in to that group or not. You're able to have in between event connections. So when you're moving from the conference hall to somewhere else, or if I'm in my virtual office, one of my team can pop the head round the door and say, "Hi, Ian, have you got a couple of minutes?" So it's not scheduled; it's much more spontaneous, and you can start to create those kind of spontaneous engagements that you have difficulty with when everything has to be scheduled.